Good evening, friends. It is really skillful to tackle tax treatment of cash credit or unexplained investment or unexplained expenditures for that matter. And to understand these sections, section 868 to 69D, we have with us none other than CA Devendra Jain sir from Mumbai. It is our privilege, sir, to have you with us. To begin with, may I now request Chairman of Nagpur branch, CA Saket Bagadia sir, to kindly give the welcome address. Saket sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Akshay. A very good evening to all. Advocate C. Devendra Jain ji, the prolific speaker for today, C. Akshay Gulane, Treasurer of the branch, and all the respected managing committee and all the respected members who are attending this session. A very good evening to all of you. Friends, as the time passes by, income tax law is getting more and more on the terms of interpretation, more and more on the terms of compliance. As professionals, we are expected to understand and interpret the law properly. And this thing, we thought that this deeming fiction, this deemed income under section 68 to 69D would be a really an interesting session for the members to attend. I was after Advocate Devendra Jain sir since long that sir, I wish to have your time for this session. And finally, because he's so much busy in his cases, that finally I got the time of 29th of July. Sir, I'm extremely thankful to you for your precious time for updating the members of Nagpur region for this very important session. As far as Devendra ji is concerned, friends, I will share a few things about him. Apart from an avid tracker, his profile will be read out. But you know, if I see Devendra ji, I will put him like that: a rank holder, an author, a dynamic personality, an excellent pleader, an excellent orator. I'm planning since last 1 month, so we are extremely thankful to you, sir, for sparing your valuable time for this very important session. I welcome you, sir, here. I welcome all the delegates to this important session. About the forthcoming programs of Nagpur branch, from 2nd of August, we are starting a national conference on international taxation for 4 days, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, in which Honorable President of ICIC, Nihar Jambusaria, would be gracing the occasion as the chief guest, and excellent speakers from all over the country. They are going to guide on the basics about everything about this international taxation. Friends, sometimes it happens that when it comes to international taxation, we feel that this is not our cup of tea, or this is not our baby. But I feel this is not the scenario nowadays. With the world opening up, and we are really getting exposed to so many of the people through Zoom meetings or anything like that. So, you know, this is really not required for you to go to Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, any other place to seek an international client. You're going to get at your own place. Professional enrichment is the basic purpose. And I believe that all of the members here sitting at Nagpur would also be greatly benefited by the deliberations of the learned speakers at this National Conference on International Taxation, scheduled from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Friends, it's at the most convenient time, morning 8 to 11, because you would be able to attend the session fresh when you have got up and complete it before you plan to go for the office. So that's the Nagpur model which is going on. I welcome all of you to this wonderful session, and I welcome all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Akshay, now.
Thank you so much, Chairman sir. Friends, CA Advocate Devendra Jain sir need no introduction. But to have formal introduction, may I now request CA Rashmi Adde to kindly introduce Devendra sir. Rashmi, over to you. Kindly unmute.
Hello.
You are audible. Yes, you are audible.
Good evening, friends. I am very happy to introduce our today's speaker, Advocate Devendra Jain. His academics already told that he was all India rank holder through foundation to final. He was 44th All India rank holder in CA foundation exam, 3rd All India rank holder in intermediate exam, and 41st All India rank holder in CA final exam in May 1999. He is graduated in Law LLB in June 2018. He has completed General Management Program from IIM Calcutta and was awarded Professor T.S. Grewal Award for Best Paper in Advanced Accountancy in CA Inter exam. His present activities are: he is practicing as an advocate in the field of direct taxes, indirect taxes, and corporate and allied laws as proprietor of DHJ Legal and appearing in High Courts, Supreme Court, and tribunals also. He was practicing as a chartered accountant since last 19 years in the field of direct taxes, litigation, consultancy, and transfer pricing as proprietor of D.H. Jain and Associates. He was partner in Messrs. CVK Associates Chartered Accountants. He was co-author of book on income computation and disclosure standard, a practical guide published by the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. He is also a co-author of book on recovery of taxes published by Chamber of Tax Consultants, co-author of budget publication by Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, co-author of books on section 56(2), a treatise published by the Taxman Publication Private Limited. He has got Best Lecture Award from Sales Tax Practitioner Association, Mumbai, for delivering lecture on impact of Hawala purchases on income tax assessment in the year 2014. He, as a past chairman of Direct Tax Committee and member of Managing Council and Law and Representative Committee of the Chamber of Tax Consultants. He has also contributed paper on deemed income provision, which was also today's topic, in the RRC of Chamber of Tax Consultant in the year 2019 at Lucknow. He was involved in teaching in the subject of direct tax to CA final student. Past assistant editor of the monthly journal published by the Chamber of Tax Consultant. He is faculty in certificate course on taxation of cooperative societies organized by ICAI at Kolkata, Bengaluru, and Hubli. He is also a faculty in webcast on taxation of cooperative societies organized by ICAI. Regularly contributing articles in the professional magazine like BCA Journal, Income Tax Review, Taxman's Corporate Professional, Today, CCH Direct Tax Online, Outlook, Money, etc. He used to regularly deliver lectures at various study circle and professional seminars. He has also conducted several programs on compensation structuring for Bombay Chamber of Tax. As already said, he is a rank holder, he is advocate, he is chartered accountant and also author, and the best part is he also conducts seminars. So with this, I would like to request our speaker to highlight the dark area of section 68 and 69D of the deemed income. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. Definitely, I cannot hold myself back from listening to Devendra sir now. Sir, we request you to kindly take over the charge. Over to you, Devendra.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, sir.
Thank you, Rashmi ji, for the kind introduction. साकेत जी, अपना इंस्टीट्यूट एंथम बाद में करेंगे प्ले कि वो करते हैं अभी ऑनलाइन में नहीं करते हैं क्या है?
नहीं करते सर, ऑनलाइन नहीं करते हैं।
नहीं करते हैं, ओके। बहुत सारी जगह पे करते हैं, मैं बोला कहीं चुप हो गया तो बोला। Respected Chairman of Nagpur branch Saket ji, Treasurer Akshay ji, professional brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you all. At the outset, let me thank Saket ji for giving me this opportunity to connect to you all through this medium of webinar. After a long gap, I believe I have come to Nagpur for physically delivering lectures on 2 or 3 occasions. The last one, I believe, I think, on LLP drafting, I believe. And I remember that hotel, which is just 500 meters from the airport. There I had come. And at the outset, let me also pray that we all come out of this difficult time of this pandemic and come back to the era of physical interaction and physical meetings. Though our lifestyle is now gradually changing and we are adopting to this technological era in all spheres of our life. So also in this various programs of institute which have been conducted virtually. But I personally believe virtual programs have their own limitations. The ability to listen for a long time in a physical environment is different from the ability to sit and listen to a virtual program. Therefore, I'll try to be crisp and at the same time cover the subject allocated to me. And also I'd like that if the subject be made a little interactive, that will be better. So instead of going in the traditional format of me only speaking, at any point of time, if anybody wants to discuss anything, I would rather encourage that instead of at the end putting some time for question answer, we can make it interactive and discuss it at any point of time. I just try to share a screen. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
The topic given to me, deemed income under section 68 to 69D. This deeming fiction or this word deemed has a very close connection with the income tax law. In various provisions of Income Tax Act, you'll find that some deeming fictions are created. And what is the exact import or impact of a deeming fiction? For that, in one of the judgment, there were 3 beautiful lines written which actually summarize the implication of any deeming fiction. So I thought before going into the technicality of the subject, let me just repeat those 3 sentences as to what is meant by deeming fiction. And it goes like this, that in law, whatever is. Whatever is not is not is. But whatever is not is if the law says it is. जो है वो है, जो नहीं है वो नहीं है, बट जो नहीं है वो भी है अगर कानून कहता है कि वो है. That is the impact of deeming fiction in a nutshell. And probably in some part of our discussion, we'll see how this particular interpretation of a deeming fiction connects to the subject. The first section in this series, cash credit. The nomenclature or the title of the section, more than 2 decades back, when I first read this particular title, when I was a student, I was a little bit confused as to what is this. Within commerce, we have been taught that sales or purchases are of 2 categories, either they are on cash or they are on credit. When I first read this title of this section, the Income Tax Act, of course, that was just a beginning of me as a student of income tax. I was wondering, something is wrong with this heading. How can cash and credit be together? Either it is cash or it is credit. So as all are aware, section 68, probably one of the most common section, which is the subject matter of verification, and you can say invariably in all the scrutiny assessment. And probably it is one of the section inviting the highest number of litigation before various appellate authorities and courts, as far as Income Tax Act is concerned. So what are the ingredients of section 68? Any sum found credited in the books of an assessee an SSE offers no explanation about the nature and source thereof, or the explanation offered is not satisfactory in the opinion of the assessing officer. If these three conditions are cumulatively satisfied, sum is found credited in the books. SSE offers no explanation about the nature and source, or the explanation offered by him is not satisfactory, then the sum so credited may be charged as income of the assessee for that previous year, that is the year in which it is found credited. And in fact, from this very first slide, I may say that it being a deeming fiction, and a deeming fiction is required, then without that fiction, the result would have been a little different. Whatever is not is if the law says it is. So in reality, something is X. But if the law says it should be deemed that this is not X, this is Y, that is the meaning of a deeming fiction. When the law says that this should be deemed as Y, but that thing or the subject matter is already Y, do we say that Y is deemed to be Y? We may say X is deemed to be Y. But can we say Y is deemed to be Y? And in my understanding, it cannot be said. Because if something is already Y, there is no occasion for deeming it to be Y. If I am a chartered accountant, I am a chartered accountant. There is no question of somebody saying that I am deemed to be a chartered accountant. If I am an advocate, I am an advocate. However, there could be an exceptional scenario in law where they may say that even if a person is not an advocate, or even if a person is not a chartered accountant, but if he fulfills so and so criteria, I'm just giving an imaginary, there is nothing like that in our CA Act 1949, but just for 2 minutes, that how a deeming fiction can operate, that there might be a provision in the law which says that even though this person has not cleared his CA annual examination or is not opted for the membership, but in the alternative, if he fulfills these conditions, then he may be deemed to be a chartered accountant. If that be the legal position, if a particular person does not, a particular chartered accountant who has cleared his CA annual examination, applied for the institute membership is given to him, he is duly paying the membership fees on time, but he doesn't fulfill those other conditions, the fulfillment of which entitles a person to be deemed as a chartered accountant. If that chartered accountant does not fulfill those conditions, then can we say that he is not a chartered accountant because he is not fulfilling those other conditions? Answer is certainly no. Because the moment that person is a chartered accountant, in the main provision, you need not go to the deeming fiction to find out whether he should be deemed to be a chartered accountant. In the same way, when you read this consequence of the above three ingredients of section 68, that the sum so created may be charged as income of the assessee for that previous year. So a fiction is created that in reality we don't know what the sum is, the nature of the sum is. Because there is something, any sum is found created in your books of account, and you are not offering an explanation about the nature and source, or the explanation offered by you is not satisfactory, then the sum may be charged as income of the assessee for that previous year. Now, why I am actually giving this example of what is the meaning of a deeming fiction and how it is connected with section 68, I will just come to that conclusion in 30 seconds. Because many of the times this question has been raised, that suppose I show certain income in my return of income or in my books of account, can that sum be considered, which I am myself is offering as income, can that sum be charged to tax under section 68? So to answer that question, Let us understand again the ingredient. Sum is found credited in your books of account, and you are not offering either an explanation about the nature and source, or the explanation offered by you is not satisfactory. Then the sum may be charged as income of the assessee for that previous year. So the very first ingredient, sum found credited in the books of account. And if you go back to our 11th standard accountancy, sum found credited in the books can be of two categories. Either it is in the nature of income or it is in the nature of a liability. Only two kinds of accounts can have credit balance. One is nominal account, another is personal account. Credit balance in nominal account is income. Credit balance in personal account is a liability. Real accounts are only for asset. Real account can't have credit balance. So section 68 has absolutely no role to play on your assets. So the remaining two things, sum found credited. One is income, another is liability. So the section 68 is meant for what? Is it meant for income or is it meant for liability? In my understanding, this cannot be meant for income, because if any sum found credited in the books, I am already considering it as an income. There is no occasion for the legislature that this will be considered as an income. However, there is some found credited in my books, which I am claiming to be a liability. I am not showing it as an income. I am claiming it to be a liability. But because I am not able to explain satisfactorily the nature and source, the law may create a deeming fiction that, okay, if you're not giving us a proper explanation, then this liability will be treated as your income. But when I'm showing certain amount myself as an income, there is no occasion for the law to create a deeming fiction that it may be considered as your income. In normal scenario, when we ourselves are showing some amount as an income, it would not have mattered whether it is considered as an income under section 68 or it is considered as an income under any other provision of. But after the introduction of section 115 BBE, which gives a particular tax rate to the amounts which are charged to tax under section 68, this question becomes very much relevant as to which income can be subject matter of section 68 and which income can be subject matter of other provisions of the Act. So in my humble understanding, section 68 is only meant for liabilities appearing in your books of account, because the sums which you are offering as your income in your books of account are already income. No occasion for deeming it to be income. If somebody is an advocate, there is no occasion for deeming him to be an advocate. If something is income, it is income. But if something is liability, and certain conditions are not fulfilled, law creates a fiction that that liability will be considered as income. So what is the onus on the assessee to prove the nature and source? The famous ICG test laid down by the High Court. Nowhere in section 68, these ICG, identity, creditworthiness, and genuineness, these three ingredients do not appear. But it is the judge-made jurisprudence in a series of decisions. It has been held that the first onus is on the assessee, because you are claiming that amount to be a liability. You have to establish three ingredients. Number one, the identity of the creditor is established. Number two, the capacity or the creditworthiness of the creditor is beyond doubt. So he has the capacity to lend you that money. And number three, the transaction is genuine. Identity, creditworthiness, and genuineness. The primary burden lies on the assessee. Once the primary burden is discharged by the assessee, the onus shifts on the assessing officer to dismantle the evidence led by you and say that this particular sum is not fulfilling the test of identity, creditworthiness, and genuineness, and therefore it will be treated as an income. So the primary onus lies on the assessee. Once the assessee discharges the primary onus, the burden shifts on the assessing officer. And this is a series of decisions where Supreme Court and various high courts and tribunals have held that once the assessee discharges his primary burden, it is for the assessing officer to conduct proper inquiries before making any addition. without conducting any proper inquiries, you cannot make an addition under section 68. Because many times practically what happens is, if a sum is appearing as a liability in our books of account, say for example, a loan or a share capital amount, and especially in a transaction which has already been, at the time of assessment, it has already been repaid, so now you are no longer in touch with the lender. So you are not able in a position to give the documentary evidences in support of that particular transaction. Then it is for the assessing officer to conduct proper inquiries by issuing either a summon under section 131 or a notice for verification under section 133 subsection 6. Without conducting those proper inquiries, assessing officer cannot straightaway make addition under section 60. Then when we say that the nature and source is to be explained, another theory comes into picture as to whether it is the burden of the assessee to prove the source of the source. If in my books of account, there is a loan appearing from, say, Saket ji, now, is it my burden to prove that from where Saket ji is receiving that amount so that he is able to give that money to me, which is standing in my books of account? Our jurisdiction, I quoted this latest decision of AMI Industries last year, 29 January 2020. And also there are several decisions of other high courts from the very old judgment of Assam High Court in 59 ITR Tularam Daga. Series of judgment which says that assessee's burden is only to discharge the source of the funds in his hand and not the source of source. So if in my books there is a liability from Mr. X, I need not prove the source of funds in the hands of Mr. X. This of course is subject to the proviso which is inserted in section 68. But before going into that proviso, as I was mentioning in the beginning, that this section is primarily meant for amount found credited, and amount found credited means there has to be a liability. Initially, there was one dispute by many corporates. The share capital is the capital, the very corpus of the company, and therefore section 68 does not apply to share capital, it applies to other liabilities. This theory was not accepted, and High Court and Supreme Court also ultimately finally matter went up to Supreme Court. They also held that section 68 applies to all the amounts found credited in the books, including share capital or share premium. And therefore, the ICG test, ingredients of identity, creditworthiness, and genuineness, have to be met even in case of share capital. But there is a proviso inserted in section 68, which is an exception to the normal rule that source of source need not be proved by the assessee. The proviso has been inserted in section 68 in the year 2012 to nullify the judgment of Supreme Court in case of Lovely Export. We'll discuss about the judgment a little later, but to nullify that judgment, a proviso has been inserted in section 68. This was the judgment of Lovely Export in 216 CTR. In this case, there was a company which had a large number of shareholders. Assessing officer raised doubts about the source of funds in the hands of those shareholders. Company said that my burden is only to prove the source, and if you are doubting the source of my source, then you may make addition in their hands but not in my hands. This matter went up to Supreme Court, and finally Supreme Court also ruled in favor of the assessee that what is to be proved by a corporate assessee is only the source of funds in its hand. Once that prima facie burden is discharged, inquiry about the source of funds in the hands of various shareholders cannot lead to an addition in the hands of the company. If at all the assessing officer is doubting, then he can open the individual assessment of the shareholders and make an addition in their hands, not in the hands of the company. To nullify this judgment, a proviso has been inserted in section 68, which says that in the case of a closely held company, where some credit consists of share application money, share capital, share premium, or any such amount of this nature, then any explanation offered by the assessee shall be deemed to be not satisfactory. The opening part of the sentence is very horrible in a way, which says that any explanation offered by the assessee shall be deemed to be not satisfactory unless two conditions are fulfilled, condition A and condition B. Both the conditions are joined by the word and. That means both the conditions need to be cumulatively fulfilled. If you do not fulfill these two conditions cumulatively, then any explanation offered by you will not be considered to be satisfactory. What are those conditions? The person being a resident in whose name such credit is recorded in the books of such company also offers an explanation about the nature and source of such sums so credited, and such explanation in the opinion of the assessing officer has been found to be satisfactory. So two conditions: the person in whose name the amount is appearing in our books, and that person being a resident in India, he also offers an explanation. That means nothing but the source of source. And that explanation offered by that particular shareholder has to be a satisfactory explanation. Unless these conditions are fulfilled, any explanation offered by the assessee shall be deemed to be not satisfactory. Now, this particular proviso applies first of all only in respect of amounts which are consisting of share application money, share capital, share premium, or any such similar amount. It does not apply to other amounts found credited in the books, for example, loans. So if you have any loans standing in the books, the proviso does not apply. In case of loans, the primary onus on the assessee is only to prove the source of funds and not the source of funds. However, if it is a share capital case, then you have to prove also the source of funds in the hands of the shareholder, and that has to be satisfactorily explained. If that is not done, addition will be made in the hands of the issuer company. Another thing to be noted in this, that this particular proviso applies only to a closely held company. It does not apply to a widely held company. Now, what is a closely held company or a widely held company? Strictly speaking, these are phrases which are commonly used. If you see the Income Tax Act, you will not find anything known as closely held company. But in section 2, clause 18, you will find that there is a definition of a company in which public are substantially interested. And practically speaking, we call that company which fulfills the conditions of clause 18 of section 2 as a company in which public are substantially interested. That company is practically known as a widely held company. And all other companies which are not the companies in which public are substantially interested are practically known as closely held company. So in simple terms, a closely held company is a company which does not fulfill the condition of section 2 clause 18. Now section 2 clause 18 covers list of various kinds of companies. For practical purpose, in general, you may say that all private limited companies and unlisted public limited companies are closely held because they do not fulfill the condition of section 2 clause 18, and therefore they are not the companies in which public are substantially interested. Any company in which public are substantially interested as per section 2 clause 18 are widely held company. All other companies are closely held. So if you are a closely held company, then only this proviso applies. Secondly, even for a closely held company, proviso applies only to transaction in the nature of share application or share capital, share premium, and not to other liabilities, that is loans, etc. Then there is one more exception, that proviso shall not apply to venture capital fund or a venture capital company. So in case of a venture capital fund or venture capital company, the source rule does not apply. Then secondly, one very important thing in the first condition which to be fulfilled is that the person in whose name such credit is recorded also offers a satisfactory explanation. That person should be a resident in India. That means your shareholder in whose name credit is appearing in your books, if he is a resident, then only this proviso will apply. In other words, if shares are issued to a non-resident, because shares issued to non-resident are already subject to surveillance by Reserve Bank of India under FEMA, and therefore they have been kept outside the source of source rule of proviso to section 16. So to summarize, a closely held company needs to prove the source of its source of share capital, share premium, etc. This rule will not apply where the assessee is a widely held company, or where the shareholder is a non-resident, or where the sum recorded in the name of a venture capital fund or a venture capital company. This was to overrule the decision of Lovely Expo that we already seen. When this was inserted by Finance Act 2012 with effect from 1st of April 2013, that is assessment year 13-14, an argument was made by the department that it will apply retrospectively even to earlier assessment. This proposition of retrospective effect of this proviso was not accepted by the Bombay High Court in 394 ITR 680 in the case of Gagandeep Infrastructure, and therefore, if your assessment year is prior to assessment year 13-14, even in case of share capital, the source of source rule will not apply. The company will have an onus to prove only the identity, creditworthiness, and genuineness of the shareholders. Once that is established prima facie, if the assessing officer doesn't find it satisfactory and wants to make further inquiries of the source of funds in the hands of shareholder, he can make addition in the hands of those shareholders, but not in the hands of the issuing company. This position is staying with effect from assessment year 13-14. In the current context, you can say that if section 68 is attracted on shares transaction, then the source of source rule will apply if you are a closely held company and the shareholder is a resident. If you are a widely held company or the shareholder is a non-resident, or a transaction which is not in the nature of share issue, in all those situations, even today, the source of source rule does not apply. The only onus is to prove the source of funds in the hands of the assessee. Now, incidental to this section 68 and 69 series, certain issues arise out of demonetization. You all will remember almost 5 years back, in the evening of 8th of November 2006, Honorable Prime Minister announced demonetization of 500 and 1000 rupees currency notes. They were to be invalid post the midnight of 8th of November. This led to deposit of all such specified banknotes of 500 rupees and 1000 rupees currency from 9th of November. In fact, from 10th November, because 9th November banks were kept closed. From 10th November to 30th of December. Initially, it was also promised that after 30th December, deposits will be allowed in RBI only. But later on, no such notification was issued and it was restricted. After December, it was restricted only in case of non-resident, that is Indians who were abroad during that specified period, they could deposit in RBI up to 31st of March 2017. So financial year 16-17, the year of demonetization, that is assessment year 17-18, where various huge cash deposit is made during that particular period of demonetization. And in a AY 17-18 scrutiny assessment, which has already been concluded last year, and various additions have been made, many of them might be pending in appeal. So I thought it fit that I'll connect that section 68 dispute with also demonetization. The burden of proof, of course, the first burden as usual will be on the assessee because there is some amount which you are depositing in your bank account. So if an amount is deposited in your bank account, the initial burden is on the assessee to prove positively the source and nature of the amount received by him. If the assessee is not satisfactorily proving source and nature of amount, which he encased on demonetization, then revenue authorities are perfectly justified in drawing an inference that sum was an income in nature. In fact, prior to the demonetization of 2016, our country had seen demonetization earlier also on various occasions, and disputes had traveled to various high court, in some cases also to Supreme Court, about the cash deposits in the bank account during those period of demonetization. You can find very old judgment of 28 ITR of 1955. So of course it was of the 1922 Act. And Calcutta High Court in 84 ITR. Again old judgment of Patna High Court in 27 ITR. The ratios which has emerged from various old decisions of demonetization are equally applicable even in the current context. But prior to going to those decisions, certain relevant notification issued at that time. This is a notification number 225 dated 24th of November 2017. This was the period when this various people were, in fact, already deposited huge currency notes. And to explain that, they were trying to, in fact, they had done filed a revised return. And therefore, this particular notification was issued that post demonetization period, it was found that associates tried to build up an imaginary cash balance by manipulating their books of account and filing a revised return or belated returns for the previous years. Then that should be subject to verification by the income tax officer under anti-abuse provisions of the Income Tax Act. Now, when demonetization takes place, earlier also and this time also, the ban was only on two types of denomination, that is 500 and 1000 rupees. And therefore, always a dispute might come. Let's suppose even if I have a positive balance of say 5 lakhs rupees in my books of account, can the assessing officer question that this 5 lakhs entirely cannot be of 500 and 1000 rupee notes? And therefore, some part of it, he will disbelieve, that he will believe as if say out of 5 lakhs rupees balance in your books of account, 3 lakhs rupees is of 500 and 1000 rupees notes. And therefore, only this much will be accepted. Balance 2 lakhs rupees might be of other denomination. Such a theory is not accepted. You'll find a very series of very interesting decisions. Very old decision of 37 ITR in Lalchand Bhagat Ambika Ram. The Supreme Court observed that where amount encashed on demonetization was part of cash balance in the books of account, you cannot disbelieve a part of such cash balance as being not of specified denomination when the books are not rejected. So when you are accepting the books of account, you are not disbelieving the balance of 5 lakhs rupees. You are accepting that 5 lakhs rupees balance is correct, but you are not believing the denomination of that 5 lakhs rupees. Such an addition is purely on surmises and conjectures, and therefore it cannot be accepted. Similarly, in another decision, in Mehta Parekh and Company, Supreme Court said that where assessee submitted books of account which contain entries showing payment made to him by various other persons, and those persons had submitted affidavit confirming that they have paid this amount to the assessee, then revenue authorities cannot hold that it is not possible that after a particular date, everybody paid you in multiples of 1000 rupees. During that period also 1000 rupees notes were demonetized. So just because 500 and 1000 rupees notes are banned, but an assessee is giving a list of persons who had given him some amount, and that those persons have also confirmed it by way of affidavit, just applying the theory of probability, department cannot disbelieve those affidavits and say that all those persons could not have paid you only in 500 and 1000 rupees notes, and he cannot disbelieve a part of it as being applicable of, as being belonging to other currency, other denomination currency. Again, even these two decisions of Bombay High Court and Patna High Court, we say that when there was sufficient balance on the date of deposit, department cannot make addition on part of the amount for want of details of receipt of some of the high denomination notes. There was no justification for adding a portion of the amount tendered by assessee for encashment of high denomination note as income of assessee for alleged failure of assessee to furnish source of acquisition of amount in such notes. In fact, this is a very interesting decision of Allahabad High Court in Guru Prasad Haridas 47 ITR. He says that when two theories are possible, that it is quite possible that even in cash balance of a very large amount, there is not a single high denomination notes. And at the same time, also in a very small cash balance, all the notes could be of high denomination. When both the possibilities exist, you cannot make addition based on one of the possibilities. So if an assessee has, say, bank balance, cash balance of 10 lakhs rupees, the officer cannot disbelieve that if you have 10 lakh balance, I will not assume that all of these 10 lakhs were of 500 and 1000 rupees notes. If my memory goes correctly, after the demonetization, the written forms were actually modified. And in fact, even in statutory audit report under company law, there were auditor had to certify that the balance appearing in the books of account, how much of it pertained to the specified banknotes of 500 and 1000 rupees and how much in other. But where there is no such statutory requirement, unless and until the books of accounts are rejected and you are not disbelieving the total balance, you cannot bifurcate that balance by saying that some part of it belongs to some other denomination notes. Then again, in another decision, Allahabad High Court said that if the cash balance of the assessee company is steadily increasing, then it is very reasonable for him that for the sake of convenience, he will try to keep all his cash balance in high denomination. Because suppose if there is a cash balance of 50 lakhs, then naturally anybody will try to keep it in high denomination notes rather than of small denomination notes, because that will take more of the space. And therefore, high denomination currency notes could be stored more easily. And at the time of accounting, they would have facilitated counting. Since the balance was increasing steadily, assessee might not have felt it necessary to keep the balance in currency notes of low denomination. Such an explanation is not an unreasonable explanation, and that cannot be disputed. Then in one of the decisions, where assessee had given one explanation that the cash balance which he had deposited in high denomination note was saving from his personal withdrawals. Then the assessing officer questioned him, then that give the details of the amount spent out of that personal withdrawal, and where assessee had not maintained those details. Just on surmises, assessee officer made an addition. It was not accepted by Patna High Court. The assessee had produced details of withdrawal for past 7 years. And when he claims that the amount encased on demonetization was out of savings made from this, such an explanation cannot be considered to be an unreasonable explanation. Then the next question is, suppose the amount deposited in the bank account because of demonetization or even otherwise, under which section this addition can be made? Whether it will be under section 68 or whether it will be under section 69 or 69A. Of course, we are going to see section 69, 69A a little later. But this particular section 68 is meant for amount found credited in your books of account. Section 69 is meant for undisclosed investment. 69A is meant for undisclosed money, bullion, jewelry, etc. And 69B is meant for investments or jewelry, etc., not fully disclosed in the books of account. So if some amount is deposited in your bank account, your bank passbook or the bank statement, that cannot be considered your books of account, and therefore addition cannot be made under section 68, even in the absence of an explanation by the assessee, because 68 is meant for amount found credited in the books. And long back in 141 ITR, Bombay High Court in case of Bhaichand Gandhi held that bank passbook is not books of account. In fact, even recently in 2016, Mumbai Tribunal in Mansi Mahendra Pitkar's case, this we argued on the basis of Bhaichand Gandhi successfully, that amount found credited in the bank statement, because that passbook or bank statement is actually a copy of our account in the books of the bank. It is not our books of account. What 68 requires is sum found credited in the books of the assessee. In Sudhir Kumar Sharma HUF's case, Punjab and Haryana High Court also said that where in respect of huge amount of cash deposited in bank, assessee failed to give the list of persons who advance cash to him along with their confirmation in respect of said cash credit, assessing officer was justified in adding said amount to assessee's taxable income under section 68. So you'll find this is in exact contradiction with our jurisdictional high court decision in case of Bhaichand Gandhi. In Bhaichand Gandhi, Bombay High Court said that bank pass cannot be considered as your books and therefore addition cannot be made under section 68. However, Punjab and Haryana High Court has given a view that addition can be made under section 68. In my humble understanding, the view given by our jurisdictional high court appears to be a better view. If at all addition is to be made for the deposit made in bank, the correct section in my view would be section 69 or 69A, but not section 68. Then another incidental question arises that if amount is credited in the business books, can an addition be made under section 68 as undisclosed income, or should it be taxed as business income? In Lakshmikant Bajnath's case, Supreme Court said that when amount is credited in business books, the normal presumption is that it is a business receipt. If the assessing officer wants to make a case that this is not part of business receipt, the burden would be on the assessing officer, because any amount credited in books, the normal presumption is that it is a business receipt. And then it is also indirectly connected with certain issues which I will discuss a little later, where on account of excess stock, etc., additions are made, then the tax rate makes all the difference. Like this particular decision of Visakhapatnam Tribunal, as we all are aware, that when demonetization was announced on 8th of November, people rushed to various jewelry shops in the evening of 8th of November, and there was queues outside jewelry shop, and there was the gold price also. In fact, it's like anything, and people invested their high denomination notes in jewelry. Now, when the assessment of those jewelers were taken up, the question was whether this cash deposit during demonetization period out of cash sales, can it be considered as unexplained? In the facts of this particular case, Visakhapatnam Tribunal held that when the assessing officer is not rejecting the books of account, when he is not doubting the inventory, he is accepting the sales, he is accepting the stock, then the cash generated out of sale of such stock cannot be considered to be an unexplained income under Section 68. AO failed to disprove the evidences and explanation of the assessee. Addition cannot be made merely upon suspicion unless sales were disproved with tangible evidence. In fact, not directly, but indirectly, you can take a clue from these decisions of Supreme Court and Calcutta and Patna High Court, where it is laid down that once the AO accepts books of account and the entries thereof, the AO cannot make addition considering it to be unexplained. Only if he rejects your books of account, then probably he may infer that all these are the sales which has been reported by the assessee are manipulated sales. But this can be done only after rejecting the books of account. In a case where he is accepting the books of account and at the same time he does not accept the sales recorded in those books of account, that will be contradicting his own theory. The explanation of the assessee that because of demonetization, there was panic among people, owing to which huge investment was made in jewelry on 8th of November, which resulted into exponential sales. This was held to be tenable and a reasonable explanation. However, you cannot simply generalize this because you will have to apply it to the facts of your particular case. To what extent you have the records of inventory, of opening stock, purchases, quantitative details. In a situation where your inventory is properly documented, purchases and sales are properly vouched, simply because the sales had shooted up during demonetization period, because that was just followed by also Diwali festival just prior to the demonetization. So without finding out defect in the evidences, without finding out the defects in the stock record, on the theory of probability, assessing officer cannot make addition in respect of those things. Another common addition under Section 68 is in respect of penny stocks. Now, this concept of penny stock, nowhere in none of the laws, neither in the Income Tax Act, nor in the company law, nor in the SEBI regulations, nowhere this term penny stock is defined. If you Google it, penny stock simply means the stocks whose price is very small. However, over a period, the Income Tax Department has coined this term as synonym of something which they believe is inherently bogus. So the moment you buy a stock for a small price and sell them at high price, it is termed as a penny stock, and disbelieving all your evidences, additions are made under Section 68. I'll highlight two very good decisions in respect of penny stock. Of course, there are lots of decisions, but two very good decisions. One is decision dated 11th August 2020 of Mumbai Tribunal. The tribunal held that consideration for acquiring shares is through banking channel. Sale transaction was supported by contract notes, demat statement, bank statement, and delivery of share is through stock exchange. Then owners to prove genuineness of the transaction discharged by these. Secondly, there was nothing brought on record to establish any link between assessee and the operators. Just on a standard modus operandi adopted by certain brokers, but without establishing assessee's link to that particular operator who is alleged to have been involved in this modus operandi of fictitious capital gain. But there has to be a link established between the assessee and that operator. In the absence of that link, and in the absence of an evidence brought on record for any cash exchange between the assessee and operators, capital gain cannot be considered to be bonus. Another aspect is opportunity of being heard. Sorry, the opportunity to cross-examine the particular operator, because in the assessment order, you find the officer many times records about the statement given by the entry operators or the statement alleged to have been given to the investigation wing by the entry operators, but the copies of such statement are not given to the assessee. Opportunity to cross-examination is not given to the assessee. Then applying the Supreme Court judgment in case of Underbar Timber Industries, even on that ground, the assessment order is held to be bad in law. Without pointing out defect in the documentary evidences of purchase, sales, and delivery of shares, making of an addition purely on suspicion, conjecture, and surmises cannot be upheld. Suspicion, however strong, could not partake the character of legal evidence. Personal knowledge and excitement on event should not lead the assessing officer to a state of affairs where salient evidences are overlooked. Another good decision in this case is of Delhi High Court, January 2021 in Krishna Devi's case, where there was almost 5,000% jump in the sale price within 2 years. And on that basis, addition was made by the assessing officer that the share prices shoot at almost 5,000% within 2 years, which is not supported by financials. Delhi High Court has held that this may lead to a suspicion. This may be a good ground to start investigation, but that itself cannot be a reason for making an addition. When the assessee has given a documentary evidences without pointing out defect in them, the conclusion reached by the assessing officer that the assessee converted unaccounted money into fictitious exempt LTCG to evade taxes cannot be accepted. The theory of human behavior and preponderance of probability based on Sumati Dayal judgment of Supreme Court cannot be cited as a basis to turn a blind eye to the evidences. The theory holds good when there was no evidence, but when there is a documentary evidence without pointing out any defect in those evidences, just on the basis of preponderance of probability, addition cannot be used. Other recent decisions were addition in respect of penny stock, which were properly evidenced by the assessee. In these decisions also, addition has been deleted. Mumbai Tribunal in Narayan Rathi's case, and Anjana Rathi's case, Vijay Ratna Balkrishna Mittal's case, Delhi Tribunal in Deepak Nagar's case. These are, in fact, I am just highlighting few decisions which are a speaking judgment and reasoned judgment. Lots of other judgments to the same effect. Then many times a question arises, then assessee himself is an accommodation entry provider. So what he does is he deposits cash in the account, and from that account he gives accommodation entries, that is bogus loans, to various persons in lieu of certain commission. When the assessee himself is an entry provider, a very interesting judgment of Honorable Bombay High Court in Allied Securities Private Limited. There was a cash deposit of rupees almost 5 crores in assessee's bank of account. Assessee accepted that he was engaged in providing accommodation entries, whereby he took cash from the entry seekers and gave him check of slightly lesser amount. The difference was his commission earned by him. However, the assessing officer made addition for entire amount deposited in bank of 4.79 crore under section 68. The Commissioner Appeals as well as the tribunal restricted the addition to only 0.15% of such cash deposit, stating that assessee was only earning commission income and therefore only it is the real income of the assessee which can be taxed. Department went to Bombay High Court, and Bombay High Court also ruled in favor of the assessee that in such scenario, entire amount cannot be added under section 68, but only the commission earned by the assessee can be added. Department tried to also rely on the Supreme Court decision of NRA Iron and Steel that was distinguished by the Bombay High Court and held that where the assessee himself is an entry operator or an accommodation entry provider, then what can be taxed is only the commission income earned by him, which was 0.15%. In this case, as determined by tribunal and commissioner appeal, and this was held to be reasonable. Another aspect of section 68 is whether can an addition be made in respect of opening balances. Because section 68 talks about sum found credited in the books. So if I already have a loan of say rupees 5 crore from a particular person in the beginning of the year, and during the year if I take a loan of rupees 2 crore, so total balance become rupees 7 crores. Now if I am not able to give satisfactory explanation about the nature and source of that, what is the amount that can be added? The amount that can be added in this particular year is the sum found credited, and sum found credited is only fresh amount which is credited during the year. If you already have an opening balance, that is not a sum which is found credited in this year. It is credited in my books in the respective years. These are the various decisions of Tribunal and High Court where it has been held that no addition can be made under section 68 in respect of opening balances. The additions only can be in respect of the credits made during the year. We move to the next section, section 69, unexplained investment. What is the ingredients of section 69? There should have been investment made by the assessee. Such investments are not recorded in the books of account. Assessee offers no explanation about the nature and source of the investment, or the explanation offered by him is not satisfactory in the opinion of the assessee. So last two part is similar to section 68, that there is no explanation, either there is no explanation about nature and source, or the explanation offered by him is not satisfactory. But the first two ingredients of 68 and 69 are totally opposite. In 68, we are talking about sum which is found credited in the books. In 69, we are talking about investment which are not recorded in the books. The consequences of both the sections are same, that the value of that investment may be deemed to be the income of the assessee of such financial year. So we are moving from a situation of sum credited in the books without a satisfactory explanation to asset not recorded in the books. And the shift is quite obvious and simple to understand. If you see this entire series of section 68, 69, etc., these are basically to unearth your black money. And if I may give a very simple example or analogy of illustration on this, suppose I have a black money. That means I have earned, but I am not paying taxes. How do the department get hold of this? Because actually what is to be taxed is my income. But income is an intangible thing. Assets are tangible. Income is intangible. You can see the net worth of some person. You can see his bungalow. You can see his investment. You can see his bank balance. You can see the jewelry which he holds. But the income which he is earning, it's a flow. If I may say in terms of accountancy, about the profit and loss account, we say profit and loss account for the year ended. So it is not for a particular movement, it is a flow. Whereas on the balance sheet, we don't say for the year ended. We say balance sheet as at. It is at a particular date. So balance sheet is tangible. So if somebody is earning, how do the department catch hold of that person that he is earning? One particular thing obviously could be information about that particular transaction. So suppose I have received fees from a particular client and I am not disclosing that fees in my books of account. And the department from somewhere gets this information, some record, might be in case of a survey or search or in the assessment of that particular person who is making me payment. My bill or some communication is found, which is that he has paid some money to me. then obviously that income can be taxed in my hands. Now, however, practically catching hold of the particular transaction which gives rise to me income might be very difficult. Therefore, when the act was enacted, the legislature thought of something else, that how do we catch hold of this income indirectly? And that is catching the assets of a person. If I have a black money, what am I going to do with that money? Obviously, I am going to spend that. Might not be 100%, I might be a miser, the spending habits could be different, but ultimately, if I'm earning, that will get reflected in my standard of living. So I'll be building those assets. Now, those assets which I'm holding, if it is out of undisclosed income, any assessee will have two options. Number one, because income is undisclosed, that asset will also be undisclosed. Very simple proposition. So if department somehow gets information about an asset which you are having, which is undisclosed, you are not disclosing in your books of account, then obviously you will be put to a question that this asset is not in your books of account, but you are the owner of the asset. What is the nature and source of this investment? Explain. If you're not able to explain, it will be inferred that it is your income. Then another device for an assessee could be that, okay, if I hide my asset, it is a risky proposition. And therefore, what I may do is that I may convert my black income into my books of account by way of some fictitious credit. So I give my cash to someone. In exchange of that cash, check is taken. It comes in my books of account as a liability. I don't show this as an income. I show it as a liability. Correspondingly, that funds come in my balance sheet. With those funds, I buy an asset. Now, in this case, I'm not hiding the asset. Asset is there in my books of account. So slightly lesser risky proposition. To attack such kind of tax evaders, legislature has inserted section 68, which attacks the amount found credited in your books of account. And therefore, they shift from 68 to 69. 68, liabilities in your books. 69, assets not in your books. So both the ways of evading taxes are tackled by you of this section 68 and 69. So what is required for 69? There is an investment made by the assessee, and then investment is not recorded in the books of account. Now the section also uses the words if any, not recorded in the books of account if any. Because otherwise, somebody will give an explanation that I am not maintaining any books of account, either I am not doing any business, so not compulsory for me to maintain books of account, or even if I am doing business, either I am a small businessman or opting for 44 radio or something like that. And therefore, where there are no books of account, you cannot make any addition under section 69. Such a proposition is not a valid proposition, I believe, because of the words of the use if any. Such investments are not recorded in the books of account if any. So if you have books of account, investments are not recorded in that. If you don't have any books of account, there is no question of investment not being recorded in something which you don't have. But the spirit of section 69 is what? There is some investment made by you, which you are not recording in the books, if any. But if you don't have any books, but you are not giving an explanation about the nature and source of the investment. Idea is what? To question an assessee about how he has acquired this investment. And therefore, whether you are having books of account or you are not having books of account, what you are required to prove is the source of the funding for that investment. If you are satisfactorily able to prove that source, no addition would be made. If you are not able to prove it, 69 is invited. For example, a salaried assessee, he doesn't have any books of account. So there is no place where he will record even a house which he purchases. But that does not mean the department cannot question him as to how he has purchased a house. If he has purchased a house of, say, 1 crore rupees, department can obviously question him under section 69 that you explain the source of fund for this 1 crore. You explained satisfactorily, fine. If you do not explain, it will be considered as your income under section 69. Certain interesting decisions. Classic Motors case, 396 ITR, Delhi High Court. Assessee was a car dealer. A diary was seized where some abbreviated names of certain persons were written. Assessing officer treated all such bookings of the car as belonging to the assessee and made addition under section 69. Assessee successfully argued, it was accepted by the tribunal and also by Delhi High Court, that there was no evidence that assessee had booked the car in its name or any premium had been earned by the assessee on sale of car without any material, just on the basis of certain entries in the diaries. Addition cannot be made under section 69. Because what is section 69 requires is investment made by me. And investment made by me, first of all, the first and foremost criteria is the ownership of investment had to be with me. In that case, it was a car dealer, and there was only a diary in which certain names were recorded for booking of the cars. Addition for all those cars in the name of the assessee was deleted because section 69, ownership of that asset is required. If the ownership was not of all those cars, not with the assessee, there was no evidence to that effect, addition cannot be. Similarly, in case of Devesh Agarwal, assessee had made investment in shares of certain closely held company. Assessing officer doubted the amount invested in those shares. According to him, those shares were purchased at lesser price than its actual value. Actual value was say 100 rupees, but assessee had say purchased at rupees 30. Then he says there is an hidden income of say the difference of 70 rupees. So just on the basis of value of that investment, addition was made. This is also by the tribunal as well as High Court. Addition was deleted. That section 69 would not be invoked on mere suspicion that investment in shares were made by assessee at a price less than its actual value. And in fact, though the facts of the case state about section 69, this gap between the amount recorded and the actual purchase price, in my view, probably the correct section would have been 69B, which we'll discuss little later. The next section, 69A, unexplained money. This in fact is a exactly same section as section 69. Only difference, section 69 talks about investment. 69A talks about money, bullion, jewelry or other valuable article. Rest of the things are same. So assessee is found to be the owner of money, bullion, jewelry or valuable article. These assets are not recorded in the books of account, if any. And either the assessee doesn't give any explanation about the nature and source, or the explanation given by him is not satisfactory, then the value of that asset may be deemed to be the income of the assessee for that financial year. In Rajkumar Mittal's case, there was a search where it was found that assessee had purchased a house property. Assessee submitted that purchase consideration was 62 lakhs. Officer referred the valuation to the DVO, who gives a value of 1.57 crore. So again, there was a gap between the recorded consideration and the value recorded. On that basis, the difference was taxed under section 69. Here again, I believe in the proper section, if any, to be invoked would have been 69B. But even in the context of 69B, there has to be an evidence that the purchase price is 1.57. Just because the value of the property is 1.57 and the recorded consideration is 62 based on a valuation made by DVO, addition cannot be made without there being any corroborative material to point out the underhand cash deal. In this case, in the course of search, 900 grams of gold was found. Assessee explained that he was married for 25 years back. Jewelry was received by his wife in the form of Sridhan or on various other occasions like birth of child, etc. Officer accepted only 400 grams of jewelry as explained based on the CBDT circular, which we'll see in the next slide. And balance 500 gram was considered as unexplained. Honorable Delhi High Court said that there cannot be a mechanical formula as laid down in the CBDT circular that only 400 gram is a reasonable amount of jewelry. High Court has accepted this proposition that in Indian customs, we have a very love or affection towards jewelry. So it is a normal custom for women to receive jewelry in the form of Sridan or on various other occasions, birth of child, etc. And in a 25 years of married life, accumulation of 900 grams jewelry cannot be considered as unreasonable. And on that basis, the edition was deleted by the LEI. The circular which I was mentioning, in fact, an instruction given by CBDT in the year 1994, that when a search takes place under section 132, they had given two parameters. Those time, of course, Veltex was in force. So they said any jewelry disclosed in Veltex should not be seized by the assessing officer. But if an assessee is not a Veltex assessee, even in those cases, per married lady 500 grams, for unmarried lady 250 grams, and for male member of the family 100 grams. This much amount of jewelry should not be seized at the time of search. And also the instruction says that due consideration should be given to the status of family, customs, traditions and practices of the community. In fact, taking a clue from this particular instruction itself, you may say that you cannot have a mechanical formula that any family per married lady only 500 grams can be considered as a reasonable quantity of gold. Based on the standard of living and status of the family, it can be a higher amount also. Like in the previous decision we have seen, even 900 grams of jewelry was considered to be a reasonable quantity. 69B, amount of investment not fully disclosed in books of account. So 69B is actually, you can say, a shadow of section 69 and 69A. 69 talk about investment not disclosed. 69A talked about money, bullion, jewelry not disclosed. 69B talks about investment, money, as well as jewelry, but which are not fully disclosed in books of account. So if you have an investment, bullion, jewelry, or other valuable, which is disclosed in the books of account, but the amount which you have actually used for the purpose of investment in the asset is more than the amount which is stated in your records, then that excess can be taxed under section 69B. But here also, repeatedly tribunal and court has held that there has to be evidence about an excess consideration flowing. Like in Shah Rukh Khan's case, he had purchased shares of a closely held company at rupees 10 per share. Government valuer had valued those shares at rupees 33. Based on this gap of rupees 23 per share, when this information was passed from DGIT investigation, the assessing officer recorded reasons to believe under section 148 and made an addition of rupees 25.69 crore under section 69B. Assessee demonstrated that value of share as per rule 11 UA was only rupees 5 per share. He has recorded at rupees 10 per share. And secondly, for attracting section 69B, there has to be an evidence that over and above the recorded consideration of 10 rupees, assessee has paid some higher amount. Just because the value of the share is 33 rupees, so it got disconnected. It's fine now. Is visible?
Yes.
So of course, now we have section 56(2)(10). This says that if any person has acquired any property for a consideration less than its fair market value, as computed under Rule 11 UA, then the difference can be considered as income from other sources. So that's in fact a different case, but in this case also, as per Rule 11 UA, the value was only ₹5 per share and associate purchase for ₹10. So there was no question of buying it for consideration less than market value in this case. But as far as 69B is concerned, only when there is an evidence about an amount paid over and above the recorded consideration, then only addition can be made under section 69B. Coming to the last of this series of sections, 69C, unexplained expenditure. Ingredients of this section: assessee has incurred expenditure. He offers no explanation about the source of such expenditure, or the explanation offered by him is not satisfactory, then the consequences of such unexplained expenditure shall be deemed to be the income of the assessee. At a first look, it may probably look funny that you are considering an expenditure to be an income. But as I tried to explain, the philosophy of this entire series of section is to tax your undisclosed income. And if I have an undisclosed income, their department cannot attack on the very transaction which is giving rise to the income, then department will try to attack the use of that income which I am generating without paying taxes. So use of the income could be in the form of assets. Therefore, section 69, 69A and 69B is taking care of situation where that amount can be added. The use of that income could be in the form of introducing back in the form of bogus loans, etc. So section 68 took care of that. The use of undisclosed income could be in the form of spending. So this particular section takes care of your spending which are not resulting in the acquisition of an asset. If your expenditure is resulting into an acquisition of asset, we already have section 69, 69A and 69B. But where you are incurring an expenditure not resulting into acquisition of any money, bullion, jewelry or any investment, but you have incurred an expenditure. The question is, if you are incurring an expenditure, from somewhere the money has come. So they are just questioning you about the source of this expenditure, that from where this money has come. If you are able to satisfactorily explain this source, it is fine. If you are not able to explain the source, there is an inference that this will be considered as your income. For example, somebody is spending lakhs of rupees on a lavish birthday party or in a lavish marriage. So that money is already gone. He has spent that amount. Department is not also attacking on your democratic right to spend. They're not questioning, we are in democracy, they're not in communism. They're not saying that why are you spending so much on marriage? You spend whatever amount you want to spend, but first you pay the taxes and then you spend. So they are asking you from where this expenditure has been financed. Give a satisfactory explanation. It's fine. If you don't give a satisfactory explanation, it will be considered as your income. Interestingly, there was an argument that where this unexplained expenditure is in the course of business. And one may wonder that how can there be an unexplained expenditure in the course of business? It could be a scenario where, for example, your purchases as well as sales are outside the books of account. And the department is not able to catch your unrecorded sales, but they are able to catch up your unrecorded purchases. Now, if you have purchased the goods, the transaction is found by the department. What their question is, what was the source of this purchase? If you're not giving an explanation, then what is taxed is not this expenditure, but the amount used to source this expenditure. But because this amount was a business expenditure, an argument was made that okay, simultaneously, I will claim it as a reduction in business income, and courts have in fact had approved the deduction. So that nullified the addition. On one hand, there was an addition under 69C. On the other hand, because the expenditure was in the course of business, that was claimed as an expenditure. And therefore, to nullify the effect of that particular those judgment, a proviso has been inserted, which says that this unexplained expenditure shall not be allowed as a deduction under any head of income. So whether it is a personal expenditure or a business expenditure, if it is unexplained and you are not able to satisfactorily explain the source, it will be added to your income without any deduction under any particular head of income. Then the next question is deemed income is assessable under which particular head? There are contrary judgment to this. If you see the judgment of Gujarat High Court in Fakir Muhammad Haji Hassan, in this case, Gujarat High Court held that addition under section 69, the facts of this case was 69, they say it is independent of any particular head of income under section 14. So when you are not explaining the source on the basis of which this income can be classified under a particular head of income, then it can be straightaway taxed under section 69 without allocating it in any particular head of income. This was also later followed by Punjab and Haryana High Court in King Pharma Private Limited. However, in the later decision of the same Gujarat High Court in 329 ITR and also in 310 ITR, Gujarat High Court said that the scheme of the act is only to tax income by classifying it under various heads of income under section 14. So under section 14, there are 5 heads of income given. Act does not envisage taxing any income under any head not specified in section 14 of the Act. Now we come to the most controversial part of this discussion about section 68-69D. Section 115 BBE, the taxation of this deemed income. Now this section 115 BBE
असं लिहिलंय का? नाही.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
So please continue. Someone got.
Somebody is mentioning something.
No, sir. Somebody was just unmuted.
Okay. So this section 115 BBE was introduced by fixing a fixed rate of tax, a flat rate of tax of 30% in respect of additions which will be made under section 68, 69, 69A, 69B, 69C, and 69D. This was inserted by the Finance Act 2012 with effect from April 2013, that is assessment year 13-14. Initially, in the assessment year 13-14, when this was introduced, the tax rate was 30%. During demonetization, there was a Taxation Law Second Amendment Act of 2016, which was introduced effective from 15th of December 2016, where the tax rate was increased from 30% to 60%, with an additional surcharge of 25%, including education cess. The tax rate becomes 60% tax plus 25% of that 60%. So additional 15%, 75% plus cess. Till 18-19, there was 3% cess. From 19-20, we have 4% cess. So near about it comes to 78% from assessment year 19-20 onwards. Now there are two impacts of this section 115 BBE. Firstly, if you see section 115 BBE in contradiction to other sections like 112, 111A, etc., which also provide a flat rate of tax in respect of certain income. However, in those sections, there is a specific proviso which says that they will allow you a basic exemption limit to, of course, resident individual. So if your only income is say income from long-term capital gain, Then section 112 says, okay, tax rate is 20%, but 2.5 lakh is basic exemption and only that balance 50,000 will be charged to tax at 20% rate. However, in section 115 BBE, as introduced by Finance Act 2012, there is no such basic exemption. And the moment you have this section is attracted, the moment you have any addition under 68 series, even if you have say only 50,000 rupees of income under section 68, and even if that is the only income, still that 50,000 income will attract this tax of 60% plus 25% surcharge plus 4% cess. Secondly, in the year demonetization, this rate was increased from 60%, from 30% to 60%. So a question arises which is applicable only for financial year 16-17, that is assessment year 17-18, as to whether this will apply to the entire financial year or only for income which will accrue after this Taxation Law Second Amendment Act 2016 received the assent of the President, which I believe was on 15th of December 16 or 16th of December 2016. The controversy is like this. If you take about financial year 2016 and 17, in this year, you may divide this year into three parts. In fact, from 1st of November to 8th of November, from 1st of April to 8th of November, that was pre-demonetization era. From 8th of November to 14th of December, it was demonetization, but prior to enactment of this act. And then from 15th December onward, prior to the enactment of this particular act. Now, this act has amended section 115 BBE with effect from 1st of April 17. And generally we say that law as applicable on the first day of the assessment year will apply. So applying that theory for the entire assessment year 17-18, tax rate becomes 60% plus 25% surcharge, etc., etc., for income of the nature falling under 68, 69, etc. However, can an argument be made that suppose I had taken a loan in the month of April 2016 and I'm not able to explain satisfactorily the nature and source of that loan under section 68. And 68 creates a fiction that it may be considered as an income. But when I have received this income, I have received this income in the month of April 2016. Amendment comes on 15th of December 2016. Can this amendment, which comes on 15th of December 2016, increase the tax rate of transactions which have already occurred prior to 15th of December? And I'm dividing this financial year in three parts for a reason that from 1st November to 8th November, there was no demonetization. The reason for introduction of this particular Amendment Act was that during demonetization, a theory was spreading in various social media that even if I deposit my banned currency in my bank account, show it as my current year's income, I will pay 30% tax on it. And therefore, to stop the tendency, with that time that income disclosure scheme was also there, where there was a tax rate of 45%. So an argument was that why should we pay tax 45%? You can deposit in the bank and pay tax 30%. To nullify that, this amendment was inserted that in such a scenario, the tax rate should be 60%. And therefore, I'm trying to divide it between three parts. That between 1st April to 8th November, whatever income was there, even if it is added under section 68 to 69, etc., it was not even connected with demonetization. And therefore, probably an argument can be made that to such an income, the old rate of 30% will apply. Second, going one step further, even between 8th of November to 14th of December, even though it is of the demonetization period, but because the Second Amendment Act received the assent of the President on 15th of December, Even to such transaction, old rate of 30% should apply. And the rationale for this you can find in the decision of Supreme Court in Vatika Township. In the facts of this case also, this pertain to the tax rate in search assessment, where earlier there was a concept of block assessment. And for the block period, the tax rate is 60%. But in one particular year, in the middle of the year, Finance Act had increased the surcharge. The question was whether this new surcharge will apply to searches conducted prior to introduction of that Finance Act. And in that context, Supreme Court said that legislation which modified accrued rights or which impose obligations or impose new duties or attach a new disability had to be treated as prospective, unless the legislative intent is clearly to give the enactment a retrospective effect, or unless the legislation is for the purpose of supplying an obvious omission in a former legislation or to explain a former legislation. So three exceptional situations. Number one, legislative intent is clearly to give it a retrospective effect. Number two, legislation is for the purpose of supplying an obvious omission. And number three, legislation is to explain a former legislation. I believe none of these three are applicable in this particular amendment. And because it is imposing an obligation, imposing new duty or attaching a new disability, because it is shooting your tax rate from 30 to 60%, in my view, this should be considered as prospectively applicable. This has already been challenged before Gujarat High Court, Rajasthan High Court, and Kerala High Court. Gujarat and Rajasthan High Court, it is still pending. Kerala High Court has already decided against the assessee, saying that this will apply to the entire assessment year 2017-18. And the rationale given by Kerala High Court is that it is not creating any new liability, no new obligation is imposed. And second rationale they have given is that an assessee cannot have a contention that he committed the misconduct on the expectation that if he were caught, he would have to shell out only lesser amount as tax and surcharge. There is no right accrued on the assessee to commit an offense on the expectation of a lesser penalty. With due respect to the High Court, in my respectful understanding, this judgment needs reconsideration for two reasons. Number one, what is being increased is the rate of tax, and rate of tax cannot be equated to a penalty. Secondly, this entire series of sections gets attracted when I am not being able to give a satisfactory explanation about the nature and source of a particular transaction. Now, just not being able to give a nature and source of a particular transaction does not amount, in my view, either to a misconduct or an offense. And therefore, the rationale given that no right accrued on the assessee to commit an offense on the expectation of a lesser penalty, in my view, is not a sound reasoning given. Let us see what is the outcome of Gujarat and Rajasthan High Court, where similar writ petitions are pending. Then two interesting judgments. Now, see, earlier when the 115 BBE tax rate was 30%, though if it was a flat tax rate of 30% and individuals could have been normally in the slab rate of 10, 20, 30, but the highest tax rate was also 30 and 115 BBE was also 30%. To that extent, it was not that harsh. But after the amendment of 2016, this question often comes because now the highest tax rate in normal scenario is 30%. And here the tax rate is 60%. So what happens, suppose a search or survey takes place and there is an undisclosed income found. For example, there is an excess stock found. Then that excess stock, undoubtedly, an addition will be called for that. But will it call for an addition under section 28 or will it call for an addition under section 69A or 69 or 69B, whatever you call? The implication is that if you consider this as a normal business income under section 28, your normal tax rate will apply, which highest is 30%. But if you consider it as an addition under 69 series, then the flat rate of 60 plus 25% surcharge, so near about 78% tax rate will apply. Recently, recently Guwahati Tribunal, in case of Abdul Hamid, said that where department had itself accepted undisclosed amount of assets in his bank account as undisclosed business receipt, then 115 BBE would not attract. Because the moment you say it is business income, it cannot fall under 68 series. In 2016, there was an interesting judgment in Rahil Agency's case. The income declared by the assessee was unrecorded stock of diamond found during the course of search. Assessee was in the business of diamond trade, and such stock was part of the business affair of the company. Therefore, since income declared was in the nature of business income, same is not taxable under any of the sections referred to above, and accordingly 115 BB had no application in this case. Another controversy about set-off of loss. Earlier section 115 BB, there was no bar on set-off of loss, but in 2016 there was an amendment. We said that an addition made under section 68 to 69D, against this, no set-off of any loss can be claimed, no deduction for any expenditure can be claimed, no loss, no allowance against these income. So certainly from assessment year 17-18 onwards, when this amendment had come, and CBDT circular has also accepted that this is not a retrospective amendment, and prior to this amendment in 2016 for earlier assessment year, there is no bar against set-off of loss against this income, but from AY 17-18 onwards, it cannot be set. Coming to the last part about penal provisions, there is a specific section 271 AAC, which says that if the total income determined by the assessee, that means in your return of income itself, you are disclosing an income of the nature of section 68, etc. Or second scenario, the assessing officer determines that income, and that also includes 69 series. Then there is a penalty of 10% of tax payable as per provisions of section 115 BB. See, in the normal scenario, we have penalty for underreporting or misreporting of income, which is 50% of tax or 200% of tax, depending upon whether it is a case of only simple underreporting or a case of misreporting. However, in this case, the penalty is lower of 10% because the tax rate is higher as compared to the other income. Instead of 30%, we have 60% tax rate plus 25% surcharge. So because we already have a 78% tax, the penalty is only 10%. If the total income includes any income referred to in this series, and said income has not been disclosed in the return of income furnished under section 139, or tax on the said income is not paid on or before the end of the relevant previous year, then this penalty is attracted under 10%. It is a settled proposition and also constitutional guarantee that for one offense there cannot be two punishment or two penalties, and therefore whenever 271 ASC is attracted, the normal penalty under section 270A will not apply. However, where a search takes place, there is an addition under section, there is a penalty under section 271 AAB, which overrides section 271 ASC, and therefore undisclosed income of 68 series, if it is found in the course of search under section 132, then 271 AAC concessional penalty of 10% will not apply, but 271 AAB penalty will apply. Other than this, the procedure for levy of penalty, same as per section 274, that principles of natural justice, show cause notice will be given to the assessee. This order is an appealable order. You can file an appeal before Commissioner Appeal. Power to reduce or waive penalty under section 273A is not applicable to section 271 ASC. Lastly, search related penalties under section 271 AAB. Prior to the amendment in 2016, there were three different kinds of levels of penalty under section 270 and AAB, depending upon at what stage the assessee admits the undisclosed income. If in the course of statement which is recorded during search under section 132(4), if assessee admits that income, then only 10% penalty was applicable. If assessee doesn't admit in that statement, but later on in the return of income, he admits that income, then the penalty was 20%. If assessee even doesn't accept in the return of income, but then addition is made in the course of assessment, penalty was 60%. But after 15th of December, this has been amended, and there are only two levels of very high level of penalty. If you admit in the course of search, there is a 30% penalty, 30% of undisclosed income. If you don't admit in the search, then irrespective of whether you disclose in the return or it is added in addition in the assessment, penalty is 60% of the undisclosed income. But as I mentioned earlier, that if the addition is under section 68 series and it is found in the course of search, then penalty will apply under section 271 AAB, and in that case 271 AAC penalty will not apply. This was a small presentation from me. I acknowledge the efforts of CA Shashank Mehta in my office and my other team members, Advocate Radha Alpe and other team members of DHJ Legal. I also thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity and all the participants for this patient hearing. Thank you very much. If you still have doubts, I am here to the best of my capabilities. I will try to answer your question. Over to you, Saket ji.
Excellent session, sir. I feel it was more of like a classroom wherein all the things were like, so this says that you were a teacher and you are and you will remain a teacher.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The members can post their queries in the chat box, or they can even on their mics and ask the queries, or they can raise their hands. If there are any queries, I feel with so many of citations and all the things, it has been made really clear, or either the assessments have most of them completed.
If there are no questions, that could be two possibilities. One is that people have understood everything, and the other is that they did not understand anything.
I think the first part is the most important part on that.
That was just in a lighter way.
So I will just say that you can just type your email address in the chat box. So in case there are any queries of the members, they can put up those queries on your email.
It is shown on the screen. I will share this presentation with you. In fact, you can mail this presentation to all the others. And the last slide, my email ID as well as phone number is mentioned.
Sure, so we have got a query from C. Rashmi Adbe. Whether the cash credits in savings account and not in business current account, what will be the application of section 68?
According to me, amount credited in saving account or in whether it is saving account or in the business current account, section 68 is not the correct section to be applied. If at all, there is no explanation, and if at all an addition is to be made, the correct section could be section 69, because it is an investment which is not recorded in your books of accounts. And our jurisdictional high court in Bhaichand Gandhi's case supports this proposition that 68 talks about amount found credited in your books of account, and saving bank passbook is not your books of account, and therefore 68 cannot apply.
So that's great. I feel it has been a wonderful session. On behalf of Nagpur branch, we express heartfelt thanks to Advocate C. Devendra Jain ji for his effective presentation on this very important and relevant topic. I feel the presentation is going to remain a treasured one for all the participants here. We will definitely upload this presentation to on Nagpur branch website. And in case anybody still needs that, I will ask Devendra sir to send the presentation to me right now. So if anybody needs it in person, they can contact me. I will share them right now. Right. So we will do that. I will just put up my number. Right, sir. It was an interesting session. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants as well for this innovative session. As I'm ending this meeting, thank you one. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everybody. Good night.